The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So as much as I get fascinated with stories that are from like the Old West, which is, there's at least one of those in here that I know will be kept in the edit. I also get fascinated by stories that sort of are akin to Waco or Ruby Ridge. Those are interesting to me because of like the amount of misunderstanding that can be attached to what's going on there. And with Ruby Ridge, it occurs in 1992. It's one of the most interesting standoffs. There is definitely like a lot of material out there on it. So it's not as interesting to cover those stories as it is to just kind of read about them. Same thing with Waco. There's a lot of coverage of the Waco stuff happens later. It actually happens in 1993. But there's one story that does not get covered as much, and it puts us back kind of in the center of America to the west, but also in the 90s again. It's definitely a hostage crisis. And it has like some really strange elements. The sources for today come from a number of papers over the years. I used a book. I used the Chicago Tribune. The book that I read about this case is been a minute, but the author's name is Donna Marie Miller. And it was called The Texas Secessionist Standoff, which secession is its own very interesting idea to me. And I used the court documents. There's quite a few court documents related to this case. When it was happening, there was like a lot of immediate news coverage, and then it sort of like dissipated. There was an interview from the Texas Standard that I pulled for this from April of 2022 by Shelley Brisbane. It's Shelley Brisbane wrote an article about this, and it's kind of done in interview style. And the way that it runs down is Rachel Monroe is interviewing one of the members of this named Joe Rowe, one of the people involved. And it talks about the standoff. She was writing for the New Yorker. Texas Standard picked it up, and they ran like the long version of it. And I thought it was interesting from the perspective of like clarity for the situation, which weirdly, it says the article is edited for clarity. But I wanted to use that as kind of the basis for this because I don't think a lot of people know about these groups. This is an armed militia. They have a standoff with law enforcement in West Texas, and that's sort of where we pick up. And the first question they ask is more of a give us a narrative type situation. It says, this is a remarkable story from 25 years ago. And at the time, it would have been 25. Now it's 28 years ago that many people remember, and quite a few have never heard of before. Can you tell us a bit about what this Republic of Texas group was and its leader, Rick McLaurin? So Rachel Monroe is talking about her interview with Joe Rowe, and she says, Rick McLaurin was not a native Texan. Interesting to note this because he becomes sort of a notorious figure in West Texas in the 80s and the 90s. Have you ever heard of McLaurin, by the way?
Not before we were getting ready for this.
Okay. He was one of the people doing paper terrorism. which we've talked about recently. He would file an enormous amount of legal filings, mostly spurious, and then kind of caught on to the idea that Texas, as he saw it, so this is Rick McLaren that Rachel Monroe was talking about, had never actually rejoined the United States after the Civil War. And so he decided to declare it was its own separate country. He convinced a lot of folks down there that this was true. And if you became a member of his Republic of Texas, a lot of taxes and rules and regulations would not apply to them. And so he turned out to be, from what, and she's saying it from her perspective, from what I've heard, he's an incredibly persuasive person, very fast talking, and people liked what they heard. Okay, so I have to just throw this out there. Secessionism, what do you think about that?
I think that here in the United States, we have the First Amendment. We have the right to speak out about whatever we want to. However, it's unlikely any act of secession is going to be successful.
Right.
And it seems like it's always going to be more trouble than it's worth.
Yes.
Not to mention, it's a federal crime, I believe. Anything to overthrow the government.
Yeah, it depends on how it's presented, it's almost like Rick McLaren thought he found a loophole. So,
right, but that wasn't really the case, right?
No. It's just that's the way he was selling it, to try and not be essentially guilty of insurrection.
Right, exactly. So,
jokingly, people call this Texit after Brexit with the way things went down in Britain. It's also known as the Texas Independence Movement. The idea is that, for the most part, to get around the whole concept of being like against the United States government, which, by the way, the U.S. Constitution does not address secession of states. The way that they get around it is with the concept that Texas, during the American Civil War, became the Republic of Texas, a sovereign state, and never really became part of the U.S. again, which is, it's complicated, but it's really more paper terrorism, kind of.
You said that the Constitution doesn't address succession.
Right.
And there's a very simple reason why that would be. Like, a successful succession would no longer have the constitutional protections of the United States.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And the Supreme Court has ruled on this in 1869, in fact. The case was Texas versus White, which is why people look at it and go, oh, there's something to this. So the court ruled, from the perspective of legally speaking, Texas was and remained a state in the United States since it first joined the Union in 1845. Now, it later purported to join the Confederate States of America, and it was under military rule at the time of the decision in the case. But in deciding the merits of what's going on here, Texas never left the Union during the Civil War because a state cannot unilaterally secede. It's actually related to U.S. Treasury bond sales happening during Confederate Texas during the war. So that's how we get to Texas versus White. Like, the argument is that any U.S. bonds that were owned by Texas since 1850 could potentially have been illegally sold by the Confederate state during the American Civil War. That's where this all comes about. But that's the decision that essentially holds on, is Texas a state, is Texas not a state? Discussion about the right of U.S. states to succeed is not new. It actually started shortly before the American Revolutionary War. Each of the original colonies, they started by separate grants from the British Crown. And they had evolved really distinct cultures and environments prior to the entire United States being independent of Britain. You can read about this. There's a number of people that write about the Supremacy Clause, which would weigh against the right to secession, or the Republican Guarantee Clause, which, if it could be interpreted to indicate that the federal government has no right to keep a state from leaving the United States as long as it maintained its own Republican form of government. And we're not saying Republican like the political party today. We're saying Republican like the form of government.
Just want to point out there's a lot of interest involved in the entire United States not having a state somewhere in the middle succeeding successfully and then being invaded by a foreign country.
Right.
Like a lot of succession movements in the United States, they're not realistic. They're based on a lot of really flimsy types of belly aches, so to speak.
Yeah.
And like they're not looking at the bigger picture because there's a lot at stake. If you know anything about, foreign policy, history, I mean, it took a lot to get the United States to where it's at.
Right.
And it's still not where we all want to be. And we gripe and complain about things that they are frustrating. But at the same time, there's a payoff, right? There's a payoff to we have this way of life that we live. And, that involves taxes and crooked politicians and all kinds of issues, right? And at the end of the day, none of the states can do it on their own.
Right.
And that's why initially there weren't 13 separate countries, right?
Right.
And you can look, it's the same deal with, Europe. They split off into countries as opposed to states, right? And then eventually they became the European Union, right?
Right.
And so it's a whole thing. And anytime you've got this movement, usually they're never big enough, for one, to make any sort of difference. And the reason for that is the line that's being sold can only be sold to so many people because other people look it up and they find the facts of the situation and they're like, that's not correct. Right.
Right.
And so it really, and then you have to wonder, or at least I wonder, sort of like with cults, like, is the line the leader is spewing, if it's self-serving, then why are you going along with it?
I would agree with that. I would say, I could see circumstances where a U.S. state would succeed. We're not there yet. It would be very difficult. And the Supreme Court has tried to hold that they don't have that right. There's several justices that have mentioned this over the years. But the truth is, it's never been tested. The closest we've gotten is Texas. And Texas is complicated.
Yeah, I for one, I don't think that a state could successfully succeed. But that's just my opinion.
No, I'm just saying, do they have the right to? I don't know if they could successfully do it, but in terms of the Supreme Court saying they don't have the right to, it's very weak. And the only way that they were able to make it a holding was under Texas versus White, even though Scalia tried to say that this issue had been resolved by the Civil War. By that point, he didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And I'm saying it that way because he's wrong.
Well, the argument, okay, but saying that it's weak, I don't know that it's actually a feasible thing that needs to be.
That's the issue is it feasible financially is one of the huge questions. And you have never, like you just said, we've never had a sane enough and large enough and determined enough group that had enough money to successfully do it, because we've watched Texas from the perspective of Texas is a secession state. It seceded in 1836 to become the Republic of Texas, but not from us, from Mexico. Now, over the years, the way that Texas has become part of the United States is because Texas had trouble surviving on its own financially and infrastructurally. So that's how we end up with Texas being a state in the first place. And technically, in 1861, it did secede. It left the Union and became a part of the Confederacy. But that's a different thing than a secession of a state. That's an entire rift in a country that it's trying to form its own new country.
Well, I was going to say one of the things about that, about the difficulty of a state succeeding is we also can't just kick a state out.
Right.
Okay, and so there's some balance there to that, right?
Agreed.
As far as, the powers that be. And, sometimes we have to remind ourselves, like, the people of this country are who make up the country, right?
Correct.
And I do realize that I don't think just because you hate, it's always political, right? I mean, succession is always political. And so usually it's a gripe about a tax, a bill, a politician, a expectation, like it's that kind of thing, right?
Right.
And you have to just learn to live with it. Just like the United States isn't going to kick a state out because of any particular gripe.
Right. Well, McLaurin, the guy that we're talking about in this interview, and we'll come in and out of this interview as we talk, he is one of these people that is kind of culty. And he does something sort of, I would just define it as being batshit crazy. But the way that we get here is in March of 1997. He sends a letter to the federal government, and he says it is time for the federal government to make things right with Texas. And he demands or claims $93 trillion in reparations to Texas. So at this time, this organization, the Republic of Texas, that he has created, and to be clear, I'm talking about the Republic of Texas organization founded by Richard Lance McLaurin, because he is one of those guys that gets, pretty close to being a lunatic that might be able to lead a cult and do something. But even him being pretty close is not really close, if that makes sense.
Well, close to being successful.
Or to just starting the correct movement. Like he just is unable to do it.
Right. And what he was saying was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. So with this Republic of Texas, which is a general term that could represent a lot of different things. So in this instance, I will let you know that he called it the Provisional Government of the Republic of Texas. And a lot of these Republic of Texas groups were either secession related or militia related. Their claim is that the annexation of Texas by the United States was illegal, and that Texas is still an independent nation to this day, but is occupied by representatives of the United States. So,
anybody can write fiction, right?
Yes, I do.
I mean, I could come up with all kinds of scenarios. It doesn't make it true.
Right. And so the backstory for all of this is the backstory about the legal status of Texas is this movement created by Richard Lance Rick McLaurin. He claims that in 1861, Texas voted 4-1 to leave the Union. The most Union loyalists were prevented from voting by violence, threats, and terrorism, and he ignores that. McLaurin still concludes that Texas met the qualifications under international law of a captive nation of war since the end of the American Civil War. So he's basically saying they made that decision, and 4 years later, in 1865, they did not rejoin. That's not supported by evidence or by the people who studied this nonsense. So this movement that he has, this Republic of Texas movement, it splits into three groups. One is led by McLaurin, one by David Johnson, and one is led by Archie Lowe. So this is 1996, by the way, when this split, so to speak, happens. Now, David Johnson is backed up by a guy named Jesse Enlow. Archie Lowe is backed by a guy named Daniel Miller. And this rabbit hole, so you guys are aware, is deep and long and crazy. A lot of this argument from this 1997 incident that we're going to talk about is still going on today. So to give you an idea of what's happened, April 27th of 1997, the McLaurin faction of the Republic of Texas nonsense, they kidnap Joe and Margaret Ann Rowe from their home at the Davis Mountain Resort, which is this remote community in the Davis Mountains. They originally had been known as the Olympia Mountains. They're a range of mountains out in West Texas. There was a fort there named Fort Davis. This was all named for Jefferson Davis, in case you're wondering. That's the president of the Confederate States of America. So this faction, when they commit this kidnapping, they demand the release of Joanne Turner. And Joanne Turner had been jailed on charges related to the nonsense that this group is involved in. And Richard McLaren declares that his nation is at war with the United States government. He says he'll free the Rows if the United States frees Joanne Turner. Negotiations for multiple days here. According to all the records, the McLaren faction is fortified within the Davis Mountain Resort, and they're heavily armed. Just to point all of this off, this is a bunch of crazy people.
Do we know if there was any rhyme or reason as to why Joe and Margaret Ann Rowe were abducted?
So, okay, the way that Joe Rowe gets looped into this, he is living up in the Davis Mountains Resort. It is on like paper in April of 1997. It is marked as a subdivision. So that gives you the sense that it's like going to be something suburban, but it is not. It is a very rural, remote area. It's more like farmland or like hunting cabin type land. So you've got a lot of people up there who are kind of living off the grid.
Well, right, but they've banded together for certain reasons, which is why it's grouped together. And like in a lot of settings, that is a neighborhood, right?
I mean, it would be a neighborhood. It's a little remote to be like connected to the rest of a neighborhood, so I wouldn't call it suburban.
No, right, exactly. It's definitely still rugged territory. It's just I don't even know like what they might have gotten together on, but a lot of times you've got to get a whole group of people to get things like a road or trash service.
And so Joe Rowe is leading that organization. So it's technically a homeowners association.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And he's in charge of this homeowners association for the Davis Mountains Resort.
Okay.
And
so he could be recognized basically.
Yeah, he's recognized. This association that he's a part of is maintaining the roads. You have to pay a fee to this association if you own property there. And Rick McLaren does not like that fee, so that's not going well. He does not like being told that they have to pay it, so he goes around telling the other neighbors, you don't have to pay that. And the other thing is, Joe Rowe's house is one of the first properties you would see along this road. It's at the edge of the community. So if you're trying to take over all this land out there, his house is a strategic position. So he wakes up one morning and he finds these people that he's known as his neighbors. They have surrounded his house and they're telling him to surrender the house. So that's how Joe Rowe gets dragged into this. So he's basically being held hostage in his own home. Now, one of the problems that happens early in this situation is as the neighbors are coming in, this is essentially a home invasion. It's just by people you know, so it's not a stranger home invasion, and it's happening in the daylight. One of the neighbors who's coming in to take over this house, he doesn't understand what he's doing with his weapon, and he ends up shooting Joe Rowe in the shoulder. He's not someone that's like going to need immediate critical care, but he is bleeding quite a bit because of where he's shot. So the minute that this happens, this is going to sound terrible, but the home invasion plan, essentially they are just negotiating themselves out of this nonsense from the moment that happens. Because they don't want to reveal that Joe Rowe has been shot in the process, because that's a different set of crimes. And they're trying to trade Joe and his wife for Joanne Turner. Make sense?
Well, I guess they shouldn't have shot him.
Right.
Not to mention, it's not going to work to begin with.
Well, no, it never made sense.
You were like, this went to shit really fast, and I'm like, if only they had foreseen that.
Right. So,
Because it's going to go to shit, right? I mean, it just is.
well, there is a massive response after the shooting and after McLaren announces what he's doing. Like, everybody kind of looks at it and they're like, this is insane. But it's Texas. And I'm just going to say that, like, Texas at the time, because remember, we've already had other shit go on out there. All the cops come out of the woodwork. Like, all the police, the Rangers, the state police, the troopers, everybody shows up at this scene.
Well, right. And honestly, I'm surprised the way that we know about Texas, I'm surprised the people trying to invade the house didn't get shot, honestly, by the homeowner.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I think Joe Rowe might be the sane one in this group of crazy neighbors. And like, he's trying to like legitimately build something out there and make sure the road's maintained. And that's how he becomes a part of this. He's got a nice house. And then here we are. A lot of cops show up right away. They have helicopters. And this is I mentioned Ruby Ridge and Waco because that's going to be fresh on all these law enforcement officers' minds. It's also going to be fresh on the minds of the people that are involved in this standoff. Now, so the hostage taking in this situation, which I'm sorry to ruin this. I know it's the holidays and we're talking hostage taking for the holidays. It doesn't last very long. So the Roes are held for 12 or 13 hours. And then there's basically an exchange to get them out and get them medical care. Because the truth is, they don't want to end up being charged with murder. And also, they took their neighbor hostage. Like, it's so dumb. So even though they let him go, and he's out and he goes to the hospital, they're going to stay here at this Davis Mountain house from April 27th till May 4th.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I guess maybe that's how, because, you know, the Rose house was like a centralized location. And, you know, if they weren't going to kill them, how are they just going to take over the house? I guess they felt like maybe they'd just surrender it to them.
Yeah, I mean, essentially.
I mean, that's just bullying, right? That has nothing to do with succession or activism or anything. It's just bullying because, at least to our knowledge, Joe and Margaret Ann Rowe owned that home. It was theirs. And
Right.
They had no right to that home, right?
Yeah, they didn't have any right to be doing that. No.
Or even, and it would be like insane for them to even think that that's a great idea, right?
I don't know what they're thinking here. Like, you have to realize we're not dealing with people that are starting from a good place. Like, they're saying all this crazy stuff to begin with. And, like, I don't ever understand where, like, I understand people call them charismatic and all that. For this to have happened in a circumstance that is amazingly average, like, is a little weird.
It's always, we don't get an idea of how many people it is, do we? Or do we?
3 people come into the home.
3?
They don't. 3 people come into the home. Yes.
That's it?
That's all.
Well,
the way it ends is also going to blow your mind. But
so
like,
what I was going to say is, what's always astounding to me is how this charismatic dude, or not charismatic dude, depending on how you look at him, can get so many people to believe his garbage.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting because Joe Rowe, in all of this, he didn't believe the garbage.
Of course
and
not.
I say that because it turns out at trial, we find out that essentially Joe Rowe had seen what was happening. And this is in the book by Donna Marie Miller. Joe Rowe had essentially been the one who was responsible for Joanne Turner being arrested. He had seen what this group was doing to her. And he called the local sheriff.
Which is what you do.
That's what you do when someone is being essentially abused. And Joanne Turner was being abused by these people. She was in a lot of debt. She didn't have a place to really turn. And They dragged her into this, and she gets arrested. I think it's for financial crimes at that time because of Joe calling the sheriff. So Rick McLaurin at this time had appointed himself the ambassador of this group, and he was going to be the one negotiating for them. So he's the one who makes all of the calls related to, like, essentially the abduction of Joe and Margaret Enroe. And the way that it goes down, he's essentially charged with RICO statute level crimes. Does that make sense?
Well, right, like racketeering, yeah.
Right.
So wait, were they abducted or were they just held captive in their home?
They're held captive in their home, but they're considered abductive because they could not leave. They had been moved room to room, and they weren't left safe because he was essentially Joe was shot. And I think what I was reading on the internet, somebody says, "Oh, they were unharmed." That's not the case. Joe Rowe was shot, and multiple faction members are eventually taken into custody. I'm just throwing that out there.
Like the three of them?
Well, there are other people outside. I think they take 7 people into custody based on the arrest reports from that weekend.
Did you have a number on this movement at all?
So the Davis Mountain area had less than 30 members of the Republic at the time.
Okay.
I think it's much, much lower than that. I think it's more like 7. And I say that because law enforcement seems to identify detaining a total of 9 people, but I think they include Joe and Margaret Ann in the original total. And when I look at that, I kind of like raise my eyebrow because, you know, a lot of these like really famous standoffs that seem huge, they're not. Like, they're only a couple of people. Like, if you look at Ruby Ridge, it's definitely like different for
Waco,
because Waco had a whole cult thing going on there.
Right, but it was legitimately one dude and a couple of other dudes causing the issues.
Yeah, there was one guy. I found this article in the New York Times it was also repeated in the Deseret News from '97. It was really interesting, and it said men felt duped before dying in shootout. And it says the Republic of Texas sympathizer killed after the group's standoff ended was willing to die for leader Richard McLaurin, but had been duped into believing the group would never surrender. This is according to Mike Matson, who turns out to be the only casualty of all of this. His older brother, Ralph Matson, is telling the story. It says it must have been the nightmare of his life when McLaurin told him that he would give up, which I'm going to tell you a little bit more about here in a second. He said, Richard McLaurin left my brother hanging. My brother said, I will never again spend a minute in jail. I will fight to the death with anyone who tries to arrest me. And Mike Matson ends up dying on a Monday before this article in 1997 in a shootout with authorities. But he had fled the encampment outside Fort Davis after McLaurin, the self-styled Republic ambassador, agreed to go into state custody. So when he found out that McLaurin is surrendering, he lost his shit. So Ralph Matson is 54. He said his brother was not even a member of the Republic of Texas, but he was a sympathizer. He was there because he felt like Rick McLaurin needed protection. But he volunteered his services to protect him on the basis that Rick McLaurin not surrender. So that's really interesting to me.
I feel like we're talking about a whole different type of hostage situation when we're talking about people that believe movement leaders wouldn't lie to them.
Yeah, you're almost talking Stockholm Syndrome. It's a different thing, but close.
Like everything that I won't say McLaurin lied about everything consciously, but everything was suited to what he was trying to accomplish. And that made a lot of it not true, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that he would say, I will never surrender, I need you, I need your gun, whatever, you're a hired gun, I won't surrender. He wasn't going to die. McLaurin was not going to die for this.
No, not at all.
I feel sorry for especially Ralph, but also Mike Matson, who died, because he probably was a genuine guy, right?
Yeah.
And again, I would say that it's a whole different hostage situation when you put somebody like that, like McLaurin, and you're like, okay, but you can't surrender, and then you actually believe them.
Yes. Yeah. So the way this goes down in terms of the hostage situation itself, this standoff with Texas, it ends up ending on May 4th. So it starts on April 27th, and it's going to end on May the 4th. In between there,
7 days.
yes, we have 7 days. Now, in between there, on May the 3rd, there is a situation that escalates when there's a firefight. There's a firefight between the group and law enforcement, and some of the militants are shooting at a Black Hawk helicopter and dogs that are coming in. Now, when this happens, Mike Matson ends up being shot and killed. Now, I've read that another person was killed. I never found the name for this other person. And I believe that like some people summarizing this have just made an error. I believe it is Mike Matson that we're talking about. And the way that goes down is, so Mike Matson and this other guy, Richard Keyes, they are part of a group of hanging out with McLaurin. From what I can tell, there's only 5 people with them. So 7 people total is what I was going with. Mike Matson and Richard Keyes, they're like, I'm out because of whatever is going on with this surrender, which I'm going to tell you about in a second. And they leave. They're armed with handguns. They've got a hunting rifle. It's alleged that they fired at a Black Hawk helicopter, and that supposedly in the return fire, Mike Matson is killed. Keyes gets away, and he is caught months later in September. And by November of 1997, Rick McLaurin is convicted of kidnapping, and he's going to end up being convicted of other things as well. But he's essentially immediately sentenced to 99 years in prison. From what I can tell, he's still there today. He's scheduled for release in 2041. I don't think he's going to make it. There are multiple groups that still exist that claim the Republic of Texas on different websites and newsletters. They claim that they are that original group, but none of them talk about McLaurin at all anymore. What's interesting in the insanity of all this is a Texas Ranger captain on the day that the surrender is going to happen. He has seen what's happening. He doesn't want there to be a loss of life. And he decides to do something that you and I always think should happen. It's about 2 hours before the surrender. Richard McLaurin and Texas Ranger Captain Barry Caver, they prepare an agreement that Richard McLaurin wants. And you and I have said for a very long time that when law enforcement is in an impossible position with essentially a terrorist or a serial predator or whatever, in this instance, a hostage taker, which I don't know that counts anymore because Joe is long gone and Joe's wife is long gone. But I'm assuming at this point they're thinking that maybe the others could be potentially hostages. I don't even know how they keep the standoff going. But they want an agreement, and Captain Barry Caver does the right thing and says, we will sign your agreement. So Richard McLaurin requests a ceasefire agreement, and Barry Caver prepares a document called the International Agreement in Terms of Ceasefire, and everybody signs it. This was, quote, to provide a peaceful resolution to the standoff, and its agreement providing that the Republic of Texas will commence legal actions in the District Court of the District of Columbia for the rights of the inhabitants on the soil of Texas to, by popular vote, decide the issue of Texas independence. Okay.
It was genius.
He basically says to them, we will let you be heard on your Texas independence, but you have got to end this peacefully before people die. And I think the reason this doesn't really catch on as being like as big as Ruby Ridge is, one, nobody dies, which is good. But two, it ends with such a whimper. It literally just peters out.
Right, but he could have done that without that agreement.
Yeah, I mean, like, all he had to do was walk outside and it would have been done. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, like, he could have done all the things that were stated in the agreement, like gone to district court and tried to get a vote on, the general vote as to whether or not
yes.
wanted to be. Like, he could have done all that without the agreement. Like, the ranger didn't give him anything. He just made him think that he had.
No, he didn't. All he did was like make a guy with a worthless idea sign a worthless piece of paper and stop being an idiot and wasting the time of all these law enforcement agencies.
Right, and so he had given in, and at that point, Mike Matson and another dude, they fled, right?
Yeah, they bolted because of the surrender talks.
Right, and so they weren't shot out, but they were chased, and they shot at a Black Hawk helicopter.
And Mike Matson was killed in the return fire.
Correct. And I think you're right about, they refer to militants and troopers in hot pursuit. And I think that that's misunderstanding a whole lot of things.
Oh, I think some state troopers were just trying to figure out who was running away with the guns and make sure they weren't going to be a problem.
Well, right. And the Black Hawk helicopter was not a United States military helicopter, was it?
It was Texas Department of Public Safety.
Okay. And so there were no militants, so to speak. That's weird.
Right.
This is weird. Like, we don't have militants anymore. We don't have
members of a militia. Well, there are militias around. There are definitely militias.
Not that are sponsored by the U.S. government.
No, we have National Guard and different things that like qualify as like actual parts of the military. Militias are formed. I'm not saying they're sponsored by the U.S. government, and I don't know how they'd get a Black Hawk helicopter, but I'm sure it could happen.
Well, right, but
I see what you're saying. The militants in this instance are the two guys with guns.
So, Mike Matson, he was the only person killed.
Correct.
And it was return fire after they shot at the helicopter, and that sucks.
Yeah, it's there's some really good articles about this one. You can read. There's an April 2022 article by Rachel Monroe called "Surviving the Standoff with the Republic of Texas." There's bits and pieces of it here. She gets close up with Joe Rowe. It's a cool story to hear it from his perspective. Overall, this was one of the weirdest hostage takings I had read about because of the fact that the hostages are basically out within 12 hours of a 7-day standoff.
Right. And it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around, like, the hostages were out within 12 hours. Why does this continue? Except that, you've got like these people who are going, they literally want to accomplish something or they're going to hurt somebody. Right.
Right.
And I guess law enforcement just feels like they can't walk away from that. I don't know.
Well, maybe I downplayed a lot of this. The idea was Rick was declaring them a sovereign nation at Davis Mountain. He was circulating flyers saying, we got to take Joe Rowe out. He was like declaring military targets. It almost reads like it's so rudimentary and like dumb that it almost reads like someone really struggling with like some kind of mental health break.
Well, right, because just because Joe and Margaret Ann Rowe left to get medical treatment, it didn't mean that he now owned the house and that
they did vacate the house shortly thereafter, by the way.
Well, I don't blame them. Honestly.
Yeah, the court documents on this case are so crazy.
Well, right, but this is actually very similar to, it's just mayhem, right? Because we don't bully people out of their houses, and that's not how that works. Can you imagine if the biggest bully wins? Come on, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of that, so the thing that was so strange in the court documents that I realized that nobody's ever said out loud, and I don't know why, Rick McLaren was using radios to talk to like Mike Matson and to talk to Richard Keys. And on the radios, the Rangers were listening to the scanner and they were able to pick up the radio signal. And they weren't sure how many people were there because just like everything else, Rick McLaren had managed to make it seem like a much bigger thing than it was. Remember, like I said, they come in and it's basically, they can't tell if it's 7 or 9 people, but the 9 number, that kind of includes the hostages. And then you've got the 2 guys. Are they a part of it? Are they not a part of it that ran away? That's it. That's all the people that are here. But they were preparing for it, like from the perspective of firepower based on what they hear on this radio, where, and this is in the court documents, take it with a grain of salt, Rick McLaren was saying things like, you have authorization to shoot, second military target identified. He was making it seem like a much bigger thing than it was, like cult leaders do.
And yeah, they fake it till they make it, right?
Yep, they fake it till they make it. So some early accounts of this say there are as many as 30 or 50 people. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I've looked through all the documents at this point. There was not more than 10 people there. If we count the rows, there was not more than 10 people involved in all of it.
That's actually kind of refreshing.
Yeah, and that makes it, for me personally, I'm like, how did they manage to do that? But the cops couldn't know. They had no idea how many people were out here, who was actually home. They knew how many people lived in this area, but they didn't know who all was involved in it until they start rolling out Joe and Margaret Ann and getting them medical assistance for Joe. Then they start to realize, like, oh, he's saying there was only 3 people that came in early morning hours. Like, it's not as big as we thought it was. And one of those people was not great with a gun because they clearly shot him, which is like the worst way to start a hostage situation. So
it's so dumb, isn't it?
It is. It's all so weirdly dumb. I don't know what they were thinking with the demanding reparations. I have no idea where they thought this was going to go. But I promise you that 99 years in prison is not the way Rick McLaren thought he was going to be cresting into the 2000s.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, I think he's still in prison. I looked him up.
99 years.
I looked him up at some point. He's still alive. He's in a Texas prison. I did try and hunt down his wife, Evelyn, and I couldn't find her. But I thought it would be interesting to see what she was up to. I assume she's also in prison.
They were legally married. That might be why you can't find her. Yeah, I don't think.
Oh, that's interesting. And does not.
Like, I've seen wife in quotation marks.
Well, she had his last name.
Well, that's what she told people her last name was.
I got you.
I mean, people can tell you a lot of names, right? There's very few circumstances where you actually have to prove to anybody just in a casual relationship what your name is, right?
Right, that's true.
And so you may just have to look more creatively if you want to find her. I mean, whatever.
He is available for visitation. He's still alive. He's also eligible for parole, although his estimated release date is way out in the future. But McLaren is in Bill Clements. That's the name of the prison he's in, out in Texas. That's interesting to me that he's still out there. I wanted to look up Richard Keys.
I was going to say,
so Richard Keys is also in prison. He's convicted for the same stuff. Habitual burglary is what they get him for. His parole eligibility date is September 18th, 2027. His projected release date is September 18th, 2087.
Right, and so he was the 21-year-old that was with Mike Matson?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was young, probably less likely to hold the same. It's hard to distinguish who was like a hired gun and thought like they were working for a cause versus who the stupid people were that were believing this. Like, If you could have talked to Rick McLaren before he did this, what would you have told him?
I would just tell him what's going to happen.
Right. And like,
That's all I can think of. I would tell him how this was going to go.
well, right. And I sort of would tell just about anybody we've ever talked about on this show, like, just don't do it. This isn't, think of every single thing that could go wrong and then like triple it. And that's what's going to happen.
Right.
And you're not going to get anywhere. And anybody who comes at this position this way, they are not absorbing information correctly. I guess, is that a way to put that? Like, he just was wrong all around. It was very strange that his direct approach to it, like, just give me, I can't even, $73 trillion. Is that what he said? Something like that?
It's either 63 or 93.
Okay. Well, give me like a lot of money. And he's suing the federal government for that.
Right. Yep.
And, you know, obviously all of it's ridiculous. It's really hard when you can't even make sense out of what they purportedly want from all this activity, right? You can't even make sense out of it. What were they going to do? Like, they were going to have their own little country. I don't know.
Right in the middle of Texas, apparently.
I mean,
I don't know what they were thinking.
And you know, largely, okay, so that's largely why succession doesn't work or won't work, right?
Right.
It's not a good idea. It causes divides. The best thing we can do as a country is to, you know, you can maintain your difference of thought, but you have to band together to stay strong, basically. And see, there was nothing about anything in his cause that really was anything except he wanted a bunch of money from the federal government. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all that's all he was going after. And that's ridiculous, right? I mean, there was nothing like concrete, tangible, anything that would say that's a righteous cause right there, right?
I just can't imagine how anybody looks at a situation and goes, $1 trillion, let alone 93 trillion or 63 trillion or whatever trillions of dollars this guy thought he was going to get out of
He
this.
should have asked for a gazillion because he wasn't going to get anything. And, you know, obviously, that's a ridiculous stance to take. We are our government, okay?
Correct.
The people of the United States are the government. I realize sometimes that can fall by the wayside and we can get really hung up on lots of political things that in the long run will not matter. But at the end of the day, no, you don't want to screw the government over. We are the government. Like, the people make it up. And it's there for us. And I do realize that it's easy to clash with people who are playing different parts to represent the government, right? But I don't even see that occurring here. I don't even see him having a specific issue that he can actually put his finger on and say, like, this is why this needs to happen. All he was doing was saying, I found this loophole. Texas never rejoined. I need reparations. And you said earlier, he wasn't even from Texas.
Yeah. Yep.
So it doesn't even apply to him.
Yeah, this one is just one of those stories that was so interesting to me. And I kind of like, it's kind of a win for law enforcement how they had changed since Waco and how they had changed since Ruby Ridge. And they were able to look at this. And once they got the hostage out, they were able to, like, I think that Ranger signing the fake peace treaty with Rick's country is like the best thing I've ever heard of. Because, like, there have been multiple instances where I'm, like, looking at lawyers who are, like, fighting back against something that, like, even if Rick McLaren has that piece of paper,
it's worthless.
It's not worth anything.
Right.
Just do it.
And I always wonder, so the only thing I could see possible ethical concerns if in a different situation. In this situation, these people were batshit, okay, and they needed to go. But I would say like that's when you need almost like a neutral, like not a law enforcement person to do it or something, because all you need to do is make the person feel heard. And sometimes it's okay to make someone who is thinking outlandishly, make them think that you have heard them and are going along with what they're saying, just to bridge the gap between like where you're at and where you need to be, right? Which is exactly what was happening here, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Nothing that he put on that piece of paper meant anything at all, right? It was just outlining what he wanted and saying, you have every right to pursue this, which he has every right to pursue it. And, you know, the judge will shut him down.
Yeah.
Right? That's essentially what was happening there. But he could have done all that without this hostage taking. But I do see the ranger's point, and I'm 100% for that in a lot of situations. And I think a lot of times it just escapes people because they're trained to do things a certain way. And it's almost like without the training, they can't like rationalize and logically work their way through it. And having not been like trained by law enforcement, I don't have that reflex response, and I logically think my way through it. And all you want to do when someone is bullying, holding someone hostage, whatever else, I don't even know what was really happening at that point, but he had taken hostages and released hostages, and there was a standoff situation. All you have to do is appease them.
Yeah. If you appease them, you will end any possibility of the violence. I mean, ultimately, these guys go into state custody, and like that's where they still are today. So obviously, it worked.
Exactly, and you know this is how it should have ended. And kudos to the ranger who took it upon himself to do that, because a lot of people could have gotten killed. All the law enforcement officers around. I mean, it doesn't seem like there were anywhere near as many people in the faction as we thought. But anytime people are dying over things like that, it's a waste.
It is. I don't have anything else on this one. This one was an interesting one. I wanted to share it with people. It was an odd kind of hostage taking, with them like not having hostages for the bulk of the hostage taking. It just became a standoff. But other than that, did you have anything else on this one?
Yeah, lock your doors so your neighbors can't come in and take you hostage.
Yeah, but how's Santa going to get it?
Chimney.
Yeah.
And I heard he may have a teleporting device.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS. True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at truecrimeaccess.com. Thank you for joining us.